With the Will of D always being a big question in the storyline of One Piece, I've always sort of wondered what it entails. Is it an ability? Is it some form of expression? What could it be? And after doing some research, looking into the story a bit more, I think I may have reached somewhat of an answer, although it may not be 100% concise just yet. What I found specifically may not entirely be linked to the Will of D, but interestingly enough, this is something that has been used by Luffy the entire story, and it's been even pointed out almost, but nobody's really seemed to comment on it, and this ability could possibly be one of the strongest abilities in the series used by Luffy. But before you get too hyped up, guys, I just want to say that it may seem a little bit far-fetched at first, but after several different quotes, several different references to this ability, it does seem to be a lot more than what you think it might be. Now, this is something I noticed a few months ago, and I didn't think much of it at the time, and I'm sure you guys didn't either, but it does seem very significant, and when we connect it to many other quotes in the series, it does seem to make a lot of sense. So while Luffy was in a coma at the end of Dressrosa, Fujitora decided to play a game where he would roll a dice, and if the dice landed on anything other than a 1, he would go after Luffy and hunt him down. So this bailed him out for a few days, and it's not too surprising since the odds weren't incredibly against him. You know, rolling the same number on a dice 2 times in a row isn't impossible by any means, but what's really strange is that the dice landed on another number as soon as he recovered from the coma, which means that the dice continually rolled in his favor until he was actually fully recovered. And Fujitora actually noted that this was considered the protection of the gods. Now, this could clearly just be an exaggeration, might not mean much at first, but this is where the other quotes come into play. So all the way back in Mocktown, we remember a guy named Doc Q who was a part of Blackbeard's crew, and he was giving out deadly apples. And when he gave one to Luffy, there was a pretty much certain chance that Luffy would die from that apple, but somehow he was lucky enough to get a dud. Now, Doc Q and the rest of Blackbeard's crew consistently tried to hunt down Luffy, basically gave him a number of trials, and each time they considered Luffy and his crew to be basically in the favor of fate, or the gods, if you will. And later on, when running into Basil Hawkins, it was also noted that Luffy had very favorable tarot cards with a very, very low chance of death. And once more, Basil Hawkins hints at this being somewhat of a protection of the gods or fate. And one last final scene in Marineford, we see Kizaru using a beam attack where he sends a huge number of beams into the water after Law's submarine, where Luffy was being protected in there. And Kizaru basically notes that if he survived that, then he is very, very lucky. And of course he did survive, which implied that fate and the gods were in his favor. Now, I can make hundreds of more examples, but I'm sure you get the point by now. Obviously, some of you are going to say that it's just something simple like plot armor, and that's what most people honestly assume. That's what I assumed at first, but there are a few quotes in the story that kind of say otherwise. When Sengoku was talking to Law, he specifically notes that people with the Will of D often have strange encounters with fate, and the fact that fate keeps being brought up with people who have the Will of D really makes me think that there's some kind of hidden message behind this, and even Rocinante sort of hints at there being some form of fate behind the survival of those with the D in their name. And there is one other trait that sort of goes along with this, and that is everybody who has the Will of D have in some way sort of just laughed at death. Saul, Dragon, and Luffy have all been in situations where most people would panic at almost being killed, but of course they laughed it off. Now, one exception would be Blackbeard, but I'm not really sure because even against Ace, he didn't really seem too afraid. The whole thing with Whitebeard could have just been maybe him panicking at being, hurt so bad, I don't know. But either way, the pattern is very clear here, and everybody with the Will of D has had some form of defiance towards death, and even Law was the sole survivor of an entire nation that was being attacked. The clear message here is that there is some form of heavenly protection upon those who have the Will of D or the D in their name. And this doesn't necessarily mean that they are lucky, it just means that they sort of defy death. Because clearly, even though Luffy has survived many different situations, he has also seen a lot of people die around him, such as, 2 of his brothers. And even Garp, despite living for so long, fighting very strong guys who are Yonko level, he has basically seen a lot of people die as well, a lot of people fall beneath him. And he was never really lucky because he never really managed to catch anybody or beat Roger. He wasn't even able to save his own son, Ace. And going a little bit more into the protection of the gods, it was also noted by the Celestial Dragons that the D's are the natural enemy of the gods. And obviously it's been pointed out that the celestial dragons are the bad guys, and the pirates, at least as far as Luffy is concerned, are the good guys. So it doesn't make sense for the bad guys to have the protection of the gods or be gods in the first place. So this could maybe be somewhat of an ironic situation, maybe, or irony. Obviously, if you consider yourself a god and yet some other group of people are getting celestial protection, then they're going to be your natural enemy, I think. And this could have somewhat of an ancient origin, going back to the ancient kingdom of D's versus what is now known as the world government. And despite not being very strong, Luffy has used this ability to survive against incredible odds to take down very strong opponents such as Lucci and Doflamingo, since most of these fights were won using fate. So tell me what you think. Do you think the Will of D is some form of celestial protection? Do you think there's some supernatural ability to those who have the Will of D? Do you think it could be something simple like Conqueror's Haki? Write that down in the comment section below, and I will see you all later.